I'm going to dance and dance. That man will look foolish trying to find me. And as he gropes his way forward in this storm of blindness at the speed of my dancing, I will strike him with my jab. Pooh, 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 he would go, and so forth.
Good evening, I'm Tony Jones with a special news update. We interrupt this program to bring you the first pictures of an extraordinary event in New York. 2 planes have crashed into both towers of the World Trade Center in Manhattan. Details are sketchy, but eyewitnesses say the planes, apparently passenger aircraft, hit within minutes of each other between the 80th and 85th floors. So far, 6 people are confirmed dead and thousands have been injured. The crashes happened around 9 a.m. New York time. US officials say it appears to be an act of terrorism. We cross now to CNN's live coverage.
Mentioning the 2 planes that have crashed into the World Trade Center this morning, says a full-scale investigation is underway to hunt down those responsible for this, saying terrorism will not stand.
And Leon, on the heels of the president's remarks, CNN has learned that at least one of the planes involved in this hit on the World Trade Center was an American Airlines 767, a Boeing aircraft that took off from Boston. What happened to that airplane as it took off from Boston and how it ended up at the World Trade Center, our details we'll have to fill in as we go. But let's go ahead and bring in our David Ensor. David, you were saying before we interrupted you for the president's remarks.
Well, unfortunately, the amount of detail that the officials who are tracking this have is pretty sketchy at this point, but I was just saying that officials are calling this an act of terrorism. They're saying that's clearly what it is, clearly not an accident. And law enforcement agencies, the FBI and others will be taking the lead on this, officials say. And clearly, obviously, they will first try to ascertain who did this. What nationality are they? What's behind this? That's really all I can say. There are several places around the government. There are groups of officials gathering and setting up crisis centers to try and deal with the problem.
And all of a sudden, it was this big explosion. I don't know if it's just like what you just seen. That's what we went through before we came out of the building. Then when we get out the building, then another smoke cloud came. We had to go through that smoke cloud again. Mom, I just want you to know I'm all right.
And then we saw the people jumping. We saw what we thought was debris, and we realized it was people jumping. I can't do anymore.
The second tower collapses.
Oh my God, there it goes! Get out of here!
And tonight, where New York's tallest buildings proclaimed America's secular might, a ruin, countless souls crushed beneath. Some of them, we're told, were on the phone, saying farewell to their families as the building burned. Some of them, the firefighters, the police, there not by order, but by spirit.
It's most enforcement, but this is one of those crisis management as well as consequence management situation that they're going to have to be dealing with.
You know, the first thing that calls to mind to many of us who have been here to cover these events was the World Trade Center bombing back in, was it 96 when that bombing occurred?
Yes.
And you were director of FEMA at that particular time. Since then, what, has there been a plan put in place for something like this, to recover from this, or to actually to go through the exercises necessary to get people out and to recover from it?
Well, they have a very good plan in place, and for even events, you know, not as this. I don't think I don't know if they put a plan in place for airline crashing into it, but I know they take every scenario they could think of and try to deal with a plan that will help them respond in the most effective way. And you know, we even practice airplanes flying into igloos, you know, and at some of the arsenals around the United States. So you try to practice for everything you can think of and hope for the best, and that you can be able to respond and hope none of this happens. But
well, on that note, then, did you run any kinds of tests at all, or any kinds of, I don't know, theoretical tests or computer tests or anything on something like this?
We didn't. I'm not sure if New York City did. I'm sure they did. But you know, you can't. how can you stop something like this without having an anti-aircraft gun sitting on top of buildings?
Yeah.
You just can't. You can prepare the best you can be, and that's all you can do. But I'm sure that they've got everything in place and doing. They always do an excellent job up there in New York.
Director James Lee Witt, former director of FEMA, we thank you very much for your time this morning. We're going to be talking with you later on. Darren.
As we continue our coverage, our Aaron Brown in New York City joining us now. Aaron, we can see over your left shoulder there the building still smoldering of the World Trade Center.
Well, it is a grotesque sight to look at from about 30 blocks away from where we are. For those of you just joining us, let's just briefly recap what we know. About an hour ago, about 8:45 Eastern Time, one plane crashed into the tower, the World Trade Center tower on the right, the first of those towers that you can see behind me. And then about a half hour later, a second plane crashed into the tower number 2. That's the one to the left, where the darker smoke is billowing out right now. We have reports, CNN has been told that one of the planes was an American Airlines 767 that had been hijacked from Boston. We don't know if that was the first or the second plane that hit the tower, but we do know that it was a 767 American Airlines jet. At least that's what CNN has been told by sources so far this morning. We also have reports of 1,000 injuries. That is unconfirmed, and we always remind you in moments like these that as these initial reports come in, it is very early. I could tell you, driving in, it is extraordinarily chaotic on the west side of New York. It is the kind of situation where numbers change, where situations change, but this is the information we have now, that there are at least 1,000 injuries, and we're working on that. As you can see, the smoke billowing out of the Trade Center. In Sarasota, Florida now, Major Garrett joins us. Major, what are you being told?
Hello. President Bush has notified, and talked rather, to Vice President Cheney. He has talked to the FBI Director, Robert Mueller, and he has also spoken with the Governor of New York, Governor Pataki, about this catastrophe. The president will convene a national security meeting upon his arrival back at Washington. Those are the 4 pieces of information we have gathered here in the moment since I just spoke to you on the telephone. The president, as we just saw a few moments ago, identifying this as an apparent act of terrorism against the United States, said there will be a full investigation. The entire apparatus of the United States government, FBI, national security, CIA, the vice president, who you may remember was placed in charge of a domestic terrorism study group within the White House to monitor and develop plans to deal with a catastrophe of just this kind. All those parts of the government have been mobilized. The president is heading back to Washington very soon. Here's what the president said about this catastrophe at the Twin Towers in New York just a few moments ago here at Sarasota Elementary School.
Major, it's Aaron.
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act. Terrorism against our nation will not stand. And now, if you join me in a moment of silence. May God bless the victims, their families, and America. Thank you very much.
The president was first notified about the situation in New York by National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. Then the second notification updating him with more details on the situation came from his chief of staff, Andrew Card, who's traveling with the president here in Sarasota. The day was supposed to talk about education reform, but the president is scrubbing all of those plans, marshaling all the resources of the federal government, talking with his aides as he can, and preparing to fly back to Washington to, again, as we said, convene a National Security Council meeting. Back to you.
Major, before you get away, and I apologize if I'm asking you to repeat something, I'm having a little trouble hearing you. Do we know exactly where the president was when he was told?
He was just arriving here in Sarasota at Emma E. Booker Elementary School. He had taken an early morning jog this morning in Sarasota, had just arrived here with a presidential motorcade. Then the spectacular, horrific pictures began appearing on television sets here at the elementary school. The president received a telephone call from Condoleezza Rice, National Security Advisor. Then he received an update from his chief of staff, Andrew Card, traveling with him. Then it was made clear to the press, traveling with the president, he would make a statement. Shortly before that statement, he was actually sitting down with some children here at the elementary school, reading them a book. Reporters asked him if he knew about the situation of the Twin Towers. He nodded and said he would talk about it momentarily. In fact, he did. We just heard the president's statement declaring this an apparent act of terrorism. Yes, Aaron?
Let me interrupt you here. Senator Ted Kennedy is speaking in Washington as, again, one of the planes was hijacked from Boston. Perhaps we can hear the senator now.
This morning, we underline the point that it is postponed. We are not going to see the business of America deferred because of terrorism, whether it's in education or in any area of public policy. We're looking forward to hearing from the First Lady on a subject matter which is of central concern to all families in this country. And because of her experience and her leadership, this committee and the Congress and the American people would have benefited greatly from her comments. And we will look forward to an early reappearance.
Senator Ted Kennedy in Washington. Chris Plant, a CNN producer, is at the Pentagon, where there is a significant fire. Chris, you're on the phone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Tell me what you know.
Well, arriving at the Pentagon a short time ago, there was a huge plume of smoke which continues to rise from the west side of the Pentagon over in the area where there is a helicopter landing zone. It's along Route 27 if you're looking at maps of the area. The building is currently being evacuated, and police and emergency units are, of course, responding from all around the building. And from the local Arlington County Fire Department. The plume of smoke is enormous. It's a couple of 100 yards across at its base. It is billowing into the sky, hundreds of yards. It's impossible for me to say from this side of the building whether the building itself is on fire or up in flames, or exactly what caused this. I did not hear an explosion, but there is certainly a very, very significant fire in this enormous office building on the west front. The building is being evacuated.
That plane hitting the World Trade Center about 20 minutes after the first one. The first one hit just shortly before 9 o'clock, about 10 minutes to. Again, that's a reverse angle, one that we've not seen before.
And you looked, and earlier we could hear the sounds of the people in Battery Park looking onto this, screaming, just seeing more of this horror unfolding in their city that led to the destruction of a landmark of New York this day, and perhaps has forever changed the way Americans are going to look at whether or not they are isolated from the issue of terrorism. This has changed a lot.
Yeah, as one member of
inside the Pentagon building itself or on the ground to the Pentagon, and these two planes that you can see behind us that hit the World Trade Center. That's Washington, the old executive office building, I believe, and you can see the plume of smoke behind it, which we will assume until we're told otherwise that that's the fire at the Pentagon. I believe that's correct as you look now at Washington. So we've got a major fire at the Pentagon, and the Pentagon being evacuated, the White House being evacuated, and we don't know precisely the circumstances there, what caused that decision. And we have these two enormous explosions at the World Trade Center here in New York, where two planes slammed into the buildings. We are also getting reports now that there is a fire on the Mall in Washington, that part of the Capitol that runs essentially from the Capitol to the White House in kind of a straight line going up Washington, D.C., and we have reports of a fire there. What you're looking at now is Washington, at least if I can see the monitor in front of me. It's a little tricky from where we are, but that looks to me like the old executive office building, and then in back of it you see the large plume of smoke. Here in New York, sirens everywhere, people out on the streets staring at this grotesque scene of the World Trade Center buildings. It was in February of '93, if memory serves me correctly, that there was an attack, a terrorist attack on the World Trade Center. Bomb exploded in the garage of the Trade Center on that day in February of '93. Here we are in the year 2001, and what appears to be deliberate attacks on the World Trade Center.
Totalitarian. Very, I mean, a stranglehold of leaders, and sometimes, I mean, not just secular, so to speak, but religious leaders who are trying to instill so much animosity, so much hate to the other, that eventually leads them, I mean, to commit suicide, and they lose, I mean, not only lose their lives, but...
That led some to the windows, where they were either blown out or chose to fall.
I've seen at least 12 people either jump or they had no choice. I don't know if it was by force. They didn't want to get burned or they didn't want to blow up, but they just jumped and just...
Smoke that's coming from there. Lots of sirens from all different directions, and of course a lot of uncertainty here at National Airport.
Greta, thank you. I want to just again recap as we pick up small pieces of information along the way. Associated Press is reporting that it was a plane that crashed at the Pentagon, and the Pentagon is being evacuated. There is a large fire there, and that is the smoke you see in the shot that you're looking at now.
Searching for any sign of life, but there were precious few. Many firefighters and officers were wounded or killed when the first responders were caught in the collapse of the towers. One police officer told us, no one has ever seen anything like this unless they were in Dresden in World War II.
Horrible, horrible. The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
1 block from the base of the World Trade Center tower, the inferno burned 4 hours after the attack. Police cars, the first to respond, were incinerated by the collapse of the second tower. Many firefighters and officers were wounded in the collapse, perhaps killed. No one can say how many.
No idea how many people and cops are dead. We have many people hurt.
What about the casualties? What have you seen?
Uncountable. Let's go, let's go.
Courageous firefighters responded from all over New York City, called from off-duty, called from vacation. Renee Davila was the first EMS supervisor at the scene.
I was there, and I saw the building collapse. We all started running. I ended up inside the Hilton somewhere. I was like trapped. I don't know where I was. I couldn't find my way out with all the smoke and the debris in there. I finally just closed the door behind me and covered it so no more smoke and debris would come in. And what I did was I called my wife. I told her I love her.
Go again. Another one. Hours after the attack, many smaller explosions rumbled through downtown.
Trading at the New York Stock Exchange. The Stock Exchange, as many of you probably know, but some of you don't, is in that part of Lower Manhattan, not quite as far down as the Trade Center, but it is in that part of Lower Manhattan, and trading has been suspended there. Bridges and tunnels coming into New York have been closed. That will create a whole different set of problems. We are also being told that the FAA has suspended takeoffs and landings, and I want to make sure I get this right, guys, that in at all airports around the country. Air travel in this country has come to a halt this morning, as clearly people in government, police forces, fire departments are trying to figure out what exactly is going on. There are several now incidents that look, for all that we can tell, to be a major terrorist attack here in the United States. So all airports all across the country are closed.
This is what's left of the carefully organized files and lives that were the World Trade Center. Bits of paper blasted into the street, construction dust 1 inch or 2 inches deep everywhere you look. What's eerie about this place now, several hours after the initial disaster, is just how quiet it is. You don't hear any ambulances racing away from the World Trade Center anymore.
I saw many injuries.
Hundreds, thousands.
My eyesight did not see hundreds and thousands. I know that my heart and my brain tells me they were hundreds.
60 Minutes, two planes slammed into the Pentagon, and yet a fourth plane crashed outside of Pittsburgh. These scenes played all over the world. In China, Outer Mongolia, everywhere in the world, these pictures eventually played. President Bush said in an address to the nation tonight, "Today our nation saw evil." The president said thousands of lives were, quote, "suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror." Establishing the death toll could take weeks. The 4 airliners alone had 266 people at least, possibly as many as 285 aboard. There were no known survivors aboard those airliners. Officials put the number of dead and wounded at the Pentagon at about 100 or more. That's a quote from officials at the Pentagon, with some firefighter reports suggesting that the death toll at the Pentagon could raise to 800. These pictures are from this morning at the World Trade Center. A union official in New York said he feared 300 firefighters who first reached the scene may have died in rescue efforts at the Trade Center. And the head of the fire department in New York City said later that some 300 firefighters were missing, and that the hope was that eventually many of those would be found. But we do know that they were heavily...
A plane crashed into the foremost of those towers that are the World Trade Center. That's Air Force One you see in Florida, the president on board. Obviously extraordinary security around the plane before the president got on, and the president is heading back to Washington. A short time ago, the president made a statement. He said, "Terrorism against our nation will not stand. The government will hunt down those responsible." Mr. Bush said today, "We've had a national tragedy. 2 planes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on the country." And we also have a report now that it was a plane that crashed into the Pentagon, and we have a large fire at the Pentagon. The Pentagon is being evacuated as we speak now. The White House has been evacuated as well. CNN's John King joins us on the phone. John.
Aaron, I'm standing in Lafayette Park directly across from the White House, perhaps about 200 yards from the White House residence itself. The Secret Service has pushed most people all the way back to the other side of the park, trying to avoid having that done to me at the moment. Just moments ago, they started slowly evacuating the White House about 30 minutes ago, and then in the last 5 minutes, people have come running out of the White House and the old Executive Office building, which is the office building right directly across from the White House. About 10 minutes ago, there was a white jet circling overhead. Now, you generally don't see planes in the area over the White House. That is restricted airspace. No reason to believe that this jet was there for any nefarious purposes, but the Secret Service was very concerned, pointing up at the jet in the sky. It is out of sight now, best we can tell, but they've evacuated the entire White House staff and the old Executive Office, as well as some townhouses that are government offices. Many of our viewers might know Blair House, where other international leaders stay when they are in Washington. That block of townhouses has been evacuated as well, and they are pushing us now back toward H Street, which is the next main street to the north from Pennsylvania Avenue across from the White House.
Okay, John, hang on one second. We're also getting reports at the Capitol, the Treasury building also being evacuated. John, is this evacuation from the White House, was it orderly? Did it seem panicky? How would you characterize it?
It started off as orderly, much like we get when there are occasional bomb scares near the White House, but then, again, in the last 10 minutes or so, the people who came out the last several hundred I saw leaving the grounds were told and ordered by the Secret Service to run. They were running through the gates. These are, of course, professionals in business suits. I'm also told that prior to that, and we don't know the current situation, that the Vice President and other administration officials on the scene were meeting in the White House Situation Room, which is in the basement of the White House. Whether they have stayed on the complex or not is unknown to us at this moment. I spoke to an administration official shortly after the President delivered his statement, who said, obviously, the operating assumption here is terrorism. The initial assumption, this official said, was that this had something to do, or at least they were looking into any possible connections with Osama bin Laden. The administration recently released a warning that they thought Osama bin Laden might strike out against U.S. targets.
Just to add, John, a bit to what you've been saying, we're getting a report from Associated Press now that the White House was evacuated after the Secret Service received what AP is describing as a credible, a credible threat of a terrorist attack against the White House itself. And I expect you'll be checking that out. We'll try and confirm that, but that's what AP is reporting right now. Again, this all began about an hour and 15 minutes ago here in Lower Manhattan when the first of two planes crashed in to the first of the two towers behind me at the World Trade Center, and you can see the smoke billowing out of the front tower now. And then about a half an hour later, just as emergency crews were converging on the scene, as eyewitnesses were gathering on the street corners, a second plane drove in too, and you can see that plane coming around the building right now in this tape, and there you can see the hit as it comes through what looked to me, at least, and this is the first time I've seen that tape, come through the back side of the tower. I guess that would be the south side of the tower, and then the smoke and flame coming out the front side. Again, that was about a half hour after the first attack, which was at about 8:45. Look, you want to be careful here. We don't want to get too far ahead of this, but obviously this has all the appearances of an extraordinarily well-coordinated and devastating terrorist attack here in the United States. Certainly nothing like it since Oklahoma City, and nothing like it here in New York since the terrorist attack on the same World Trade Center buildings in February of 1993. At the Pentagon, a plane or a helicopter has crashed, apparently as part of whatever this operation has been, and Jamie McIntyre is there. Jamie, what are you hearing?
Well, Aaron, there is a lot of confusion here at the Pentagon. It appears that something hit the Pentagon on the outside of the 5th corridor, on the Army corridor. Several Army officers I talked to reported hearing a big explosion, seeing shards of metal coming past their window. The Pentagon has been evacuated. Emergency services personnel were rushing to reports of several people trapped in the building. Most of the building's 24,000 people are outside of the building or in the center courtyard as emergency teams try to sort out what has happened here. There is, of course, thick black smoke billowing from the scene. There's a lot of confusion. The Defense Protective Service, which is the police force here in the Pentagon, has been urging people to get out of the building and move away from the scene so they can handle the emergency situation. Again, it appears that an aircraft of some sort did hit the side of the Pentagon, the west front, which faces sort of toward Arlington National Cemetery. It's a corridor where a lot of Army offices are located.
Wow.
And some people were...
Jamie, I need you to stop for a second. There has just been a huge explosion. We can see a billowing smoke rising, and I'll tell you that I can't see that second tower, but there was a cascade of sparks and fire, and now it looks almost like a mushroom cloud explosion, this huge billowing smoke in the second tower. This was the second of the two towers hit. And I cannot see behind that smoke, obviously, as you can either. The first tower in front has not changed, and we see this extraordinarily and frightening scene behind us of this second tower, now just encased in smoke. What is behind it, I cannot tell you. But just look at that. That is about as frightening a scene as you will ever see. Again, this is going on now in 2 cities. We have a report that there is a fire at the State Department as well, and that is being evacuated. So we've got fires at the Pentagon evacuated, the State Department evacuated, the White House evacuated on the basis of what the Secret Service describes as a credible terrorist threat. We have 2 explosions, 2 planes hitting the World Trade Center here in New York, and what this second explosion was that took place about a part of the south, that would be the South Tower, has apparently collapsed. We don't know if that was from the impact of this first plane that hit it or whether something else has happened there, and we'll work on that. Our Washington Bureau Chief, Frank Sesno, is on the phone. Frank, what are you hearing?
Aaron, I just drove past the Pentagon across the 14th Street Bridge, which is now choked with traffic, We're beginning to hear emergency sirens and rescue personnel fanning out across Washington. There is a gigantic black billowing cloud of smoke that is rising over the Pentagon. You heard Jamie McIntyre a moment ago describe where that was coming from. I can also tell you that local radio, in addition to talking about evacuations, as we've heard at the Pentagon, the White House is reporting that the Capitol building has been evacuated and the Treasury Department has been evacuated. Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, is exceptionally tense and clearly taking steps as if it is virtually under siege here. We don't know specifically, as you said, what has taken place at the Pentagon, but this is very serious, striking at the heart of the national government. And as John King was explaining, the White House
Frank, it's Aaron. I need to interrupt you for a second. Again, there has been a second explosion here in Manhattan at the Trade Center. We are getting reports that a part of the tower, the second tower, the one a bit further to the south of us, has collapsed. We are checking on that. We are also told that the Sears Tower in Chicago has been evacuated, and what I can't tell you on that is whether there was something specific that happened there, whether there was an attack on that building yet, we're checking that out, or whether there was a warning, whether there was a threat of some sort, or whether that is simply precautionary. What we can tell you is that just in the last several minutes here, 2 or 3 minutes, a second or third, I guess technically, extraordinary event has happened here in Lower Manhattan. You can see this extraordinary plume of smoke that is, or was at least, the second tower of the World Trade Center. Perhaps 3 or 4 minutes ago, you could, from where we were standing, see that second building that is just a bit to the south of the first building, but you can't see it anymore. It is covered with smoke. A large plume of smoke also coming still from the first tower, where the first plane hit at about 8:45. We can, by the way, if we can cue the tape, we can show you that second attack, or at least the second explosion in the Trade Center that occurred at about 9:15 Eastern Time. As you can imagine, there you can see to the right of your screen a plane coming in. We do have a report of a hijacked American Airlines plane. It comes into the south side, and then boom, you can see the fire coming out the front, or the north side of the building. I guess that'd be the northeast side of the building. And then just in the last several minutes, there has been a second explosion, or at least perhaps not an explosion, perhaps part of the building simply collapsed. And that's what we saw, and that's what we're looking at as smoke now just covers Lower Manhattan, almost as far to the end of Manhattan Island as you can get, is where the trade centers are. The Sears Tower in Chicago has been evacuated, and we continue to check on the circumstances there. The Pentagon, the State Department, and the White House have been evacuated in Washington as well. The president has, we can show you now what happened just a few moments ago at the Trade Center. Watch the building to the left, to the back of those two buildings. This is just a few minutes ago. We don't know if something happened, another explosion, or if the building was so weakened it just collapsed. But we have one of our producers on the phone, and I didn't get the name, so why don't we just go ahead? You there?
Yeah, this is Rose Arcee calling from New York.
Rose, tell me what you know.
Just a few minutes ago, we saw there's a portion of the building where the first plane struck that seemed to be buckling inside itself, almost as if the top of the building was going to fall. Shortly after that, 2 people, it's hard to tell whether they were being pushed or they physically approached themselves the sort of river side of the building, it would be the west side of the building, and appeared to jump from the top floors, just under where you're seeing the smoke and fire.
That is extraordinary. The South Tower, the World Trade Center, has collapsed. Again, tell me, how long ago was it that you saw this?
This must have been about 5 minutes ago, and prior to that, you could see heads popping out of windows right beneath where that big gaping hole is. So there appeared to be people alive right below where the crash point was that were trying to find some way out of there. And just as the thing started to buckle, you saw them plummeting from that top floor.
Right, and perhaps this is stating the obvious. We apologize for that, but obviously people were already at work here at the Trade Center when this happened. We don't know how many people have been hurt in all of this. We have no idea at this point. As you look at an aerial shot coming from the, I guess that would be coming from the south of the Trade Center, or what is at least the Trade Center behind those huge plumes of smoke. All airports across the country, every airport in the United States has been shut down as the FAA and the government tries to figure out exactly what has happened, what is at risk, what is not, who is behind it. Are there more explosions, more attacks yet to come? Here in New York, trading on the New York Stock Exchange has been suspended, at least for now. All bridges and tunnels coming into the city have been shut down as police try and clear the way. We can tell you, as we were coming in, perhaps an hour ago, there was a convoy, I can't think of a better word, a convoy of fire and police trucks racing down the West Side Highway, and this is in the middle of rush hour. Obviously, every available fire unit here in Manhattan has been brought to the Trade Center. Outside the White House, John King, our senior White House correspondent. John.
Hello, Aaron. They have pushed us even further back away from the White House now, and there are more than a half dozen fire trucks, some of the Secret Service now patrolling the perimeter in Lafayette Park, which is directly across from the White House, have automatic rifles drawn to keep people away from the park, and they're policing back and forth. You can probably hear additional fire apparatus arriving on the scene. Senior White House staffers who were evacuated, all they can tell us is that they were told that there was a credible threat on the White House as well, and that they were told to evacuate the premises. What we do not know is whether or not the Vice President and the National Security Team have stayed inside the White House Situation Room. We know that they were directing and monitoring operations from there as of just about 20 minutes ago. But the White House staff, the Executive Office Building staff, and all the office buildings around, including the Treasury Department and some government and some non-government office buildings, people have been evacuated out into the street. And again, the Secret Service now putting up yellow police line tape, and some of them patrolling Lafayette Park with automatic rifles, which is a scene quite extraordinary here across from the White House.
John, tell us as best you can what the government's national security apparatus will do right now. I mean, what do you guess is happening, and where is it happening?
Well, I don't want to guess at all, but from the White House Situation Room, a president or a vice president can direct a war, can direct a full-scale world war. The White House Situation Room is where all information, it is accessible to all information from the United States military, from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, from the Federal Aviation Administration in this case. The White House Situation Room is prepared just for situations like this, unfortunately, to be prepared in a time of crisis for the president to monitor incoming information and to direct any U.S. military or non-military emergency response. The White House Situation Room is a bomb shelter, for that matter. That part of the White House is a bomb shelter. Whether or not they have stayed in there is unclear. We know in the past that would be the routine. We just do not have a direct answer as yet, because most of the staff, if not all of the staff, has been evacuated from the premises.
So I gather you're just you're not able to get any calls into the building right now, or at least not getting them answered at this point.
Calls you get into the building are not answered at this point. And more fire apparatus showing up now as we speak. We saw most of the senior staff come out. We have not seen the national security staff that we would recognize anyway, but I should note there are other gates from the White House. We are on the north side, and this is
John, you're being drowned out by the sirens. Alan Dodd-Frank of our bureau here in New York joins us on the phone. Alan, where are you?
Hi, Aaron. Our colleague Jennifer Westhoven also just arrived. She was closer to the building. I'm just south of Canal Street, about 10 blocks north of World Trade Center. And just before 10 o'clock, parts of the building began peeling away. People started screaming. Jennifer tells me, because she was a little closer to the building, that the police began yelling, "Run, run." And thousands of people started running away from the buildings as they were falling. That was, of course, followed by a onrush of ambulances and special police vehicles. Some people have told us, although I can't confirm this, that dozens of stories of the building have fallen away, maybe down as low as the 30th floor.
Let's get him Mike.
And again, just because we lost a little bit at the beginning, where are you physically now? This is
I'm
the
just south
tape.
of the Holland Tunnel in downtown Manhattan, perhaps 10 to 15 blocks north of the World Trade Center.
Got it. And the pictures that our viewers are looking at, this was that collapse of the South Tower.
Correct.
Just a few minutes ago here in New York.
Yes, and moments after that, people began running toward us. Jennifer Westover, who normally is at the stock exchange, was only about 5 blocks away, and she saw the same thing.
Alan, thank you. Let me go to one of New York's deputy mayors, Randy. Former deputy mayor. What are you hearing, Randy?
I only know what I have seen on television. I've tried to talk to some friends.
Hand me the, here we go. Hand me the microphone. There we go.
I only know what I've heard on television. I've tried to speak to some friends. Obviously, phone lines, communication is difficult. You know, nothing prepares you in life for a senseless tragedy like this one, but there is no city better prepared to deal with such emergency situations than New York City.
Tell me, based on the plan, what is happening 30 blocks away?
Sure. Mayor Giuliani established early on an Office of Emergency Management to coordinate all the government agencies involved. So you have coordinated leadership of police, fire, health, all the city agencies responding to that emergency. They've planned for this kind of event. Unfortunately, this is not a unique occurrence in the life of New York City or our country. Tragedies like this
It may
have
not be a
happened.
unique occurrence, but it is a very rare and extraordinary one.
It is extraordinary,
Right.
and therefore, in New York City, we have coordinated response, and they're responding now and providing every help that they can under these extraordinary circumstances.
Hang on one second. We have a report now of an explosion on Capitol Hill, and we are checking that out. We have a report of a plane crashing at the Pentagon being evacuated, fire on the mall in Washington, the State Department evacuated, and we have all flights shut down across.
What I'm trying to say is that the United States should learn the lesson out of this. Surely, those who did this horrific act of terror, you know, they feel so much hatred towards the United States. There are reasons behind it. Now, and we all know that there are people around the world who hate the United States and hate it for good reasons. And I do hope that the United States will learn a lesson out of this and put an end to its hypocrisy and double standard and implement the same set of principles on all countries, including Israel.
But Mr. Kazak, are you saying by that, I mean, a lot of the world watching on to these horrific attacks in New York today would say, yes, America perhaps should learn. But of course, they're going to retaliate and retaliate very strongly. Are you saying they shouldn't?
Well, I think, you know, they should do exactly what they did towards McVeigh.
And also point out some things that are not insignificant that we don't know. And one of the things we don't know is we do not now know how many fatalities there have been and how many injuries there are.
Through the 7 network's worldwide resources, our live and uninterrupted...
I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. It's incredible. Okay, I'm gonna have to go find people who need help, because I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Can I get a toot? I'm seeing a couple of clean breaths. That's good. Okay. Back to you. This is the car I hid behind. It saved my life. Oh, wait, maybe it was this one. There's all these noises. I don't know what it is. They say someone needs help.
Yeah, Mike! Mike! Mike, come over here! Yeah!
Anybody need a doctor?
Where are you?
Don't have oxygen.
Hello, Doc.
Hey, that guy needs some oxygen. If someone can share it with him.
10-4.
Thanks.
Here in Washington, it could be that may have been something that happened at the Pentagon. We're not very clear on that. But we did hear a sound. We heard something that sounded like a loud boom about 5 minutes.
And Kate, you are again how far away from the Capitol building itself?
I'm standing on Pennsylvania Avenue, which is the main artery in Washington, D.C., and I'm about 2 blocks away from the Capitol. I did just see a spokesperson, by the way, for the Speaker of the House, Mr. Hastert, Dennis Hastert, who tells me that Mr. Hastert and other leaders have been evacuated into what he called a secure location. It's not clear where exactly they are, but they've been put somewhere secure.
And because we can't see it at this point, just give me a sense of what it looks like there. Are there many, many people on the street?
The sidewalks, people are calm. I think most people don't really know what's going on. Most people haven't been watching the news. But the sidewalks are definitely full of people where, normally at this time of the morning there wouldn't be that many people out here. And as I say, I've been passed by numerous members of Congress and senators and staff, who I know well, who have been coming past me asking me what's going on.
Kate, why don't you hang around here and continue to report on that. Let me just, again, for those viewers who are joining us at about 20 minutes past 10 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, let me just briefly recap. Attacks on 2 American cities, New York and the Capitol in Washington. It began at about 8:45 Eastern Time when a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. That was the building hit first. And then about a half an hour later, a second plane, and I'm not sure if we have the tape available. If we do, we'll show it to you. You can see the second plane coming in from the right side of your screen, going into the tower itself. This is an extraordinary and troubling piece of tape. The Justice Department is now being evacuated. The second attack on the Trade Center occurred about a half an hour or so after the first one. We have a report, CNN has been told, that an American Airlines 767 jet was hijacked out of Boston today. We don't know which of those 2 planes hit the tower the second time.
You guys going in?
Yeah.
Come with you. But I don't want to get too much closer, because the more buildings that come down, then we're not going to help anybody.
All right.
I think we should. Yeah.
Where's the incident come out?
Let's just. Yeah. Okay. Let's just wait right here. Let's just station up right here. Okay.
All right, Doc.
Why don't we set up? Can you hang IVs from this pole here?
Okay.
Okay.
Where'd you get over there, buddy?
Yeah. We just heard another explosion. They're handing out gloves and masks. The consensus is it's too unsafe to go in there. Just going to wait here until they bring some people out. I was hooked up with some firemen with some first aid stuff.
On where it was in relationship to where the plane went down, but they are relatively close to one another. Whether it hit any part of that Pentagon, I'm not sure.
How low was the plane?
When it was coming down?
Yeah.
It was coming down on less than a 45-degree angle and coming down toward the side of the 395. And when it came down, it just missed the 395 and went down below it, and then you saw the boom, the fire come up from it.
Were you able to see what kind of plane or what airline it belonged to?
No, I did not see what kind of an airline. I just assumed because we were so close to the airport, it was coming into land.
But it seemed awfully low to you.
Yes, and fast.
How big was the fireball?
I'm spatially challenged at times, and it was pretty big.
What did you think was happening?
I know that hit the ground and exploded.
Were you frightened yourself?
Yes, yes. Everybody stopped the cars, and we all got out of it, and so forth.
Right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your talking to us. Aaron, back to you.
David, thank you. CNN's David Ensor in Washington. CNN's Brian Palmer joins us on the phone from here in Manhattan. Brian, why don't you begin by telling me where you are?
We are in front of the criminal courthouse after being pushed north slightly. We watched one of the towers of the World Trade Center disappear from the skyline. It basically folded into itself in a plume of gray smoke. A crowd of thousands of people dashed up Broadway, followed by emergency services personnel. That's all we know now. We're watching the plume of smoke and debris just sort of waft across lower Manhattan, and people are lining up at this payphone behind me trying to find out whether their relatives are safe.
Let me just briefly go to Randy. Randy, just look out there and tell me what you're thinking when you see what now appears that at least part of one of the landmark buildings in this city, one of the most recognizable buildings in the country, is gone.
It's the kind of moment you hope will never come. When you have been in government, when you care as much about this city and this country as a mayor like Rudy Giuliani does, it's a moment you pray will never come, and you pray for the families of anyone affected by this tragedy. But as a city, you know, we come together, and our emergency services provide every support they can in the face of such a senseless tragedy.
It is an unbelievable scene as
Incredible.
You look down. I mean, we stand here at some point every day looking out at this city this time of year. It's extraordinarily pretty, and you see those two buildings high above lower Manhattan, and you look out there today and you see this gaping hole in one of them, these plumes of smoke that continue to pour from the scene, and you know that there's nothing behind. That second tower, or at least parts of it, are gone. We join now one of our affiliates, WNYW, and their coverage here in New York. Well, we'll try and make that connection again in two cities now, and there are a lot of pieces of information floating around. We need to try and button up some of this. We had a report earlier that we believe we could tell you is not correct, that there was an explosion at the Capitol. There was none, as we now believe. There was no explosion at the Capitol. Air travel routed to Canada has been international flights going into the United States or into Canada, guys. Into the United States. International flights headed for the United States are being sent to Canada now, to airports there, as all air traffic in the United States has come to a halt. The FAA has shut down every airport in the country, and to our knowledge, and this is to the best of our memory, that has never happened before. We're starting to get some pictures of the scene from the ground here in Manhattan. Again, this all started about almost an hour and a half ago, I guess, a little more than that. This is a live picture of the scene now. We have crews on the ground, and they've been trying to get tape back so we can show you the situation on the ground. As you can imagine, literally, thousands of police, fire, rescue officials have converged on the scene. There are, and we don't know how many, injured to be tended to be taken to hospitals, and we continue to check hospitals to find out how many, the extent of injuries. We do not yet know how many fatalities.
I've never heard of that album before either, but
there is the scene. This is tape now from WABC here in New York. Their crews shot this picture. As you see, fire trucks and firefighters, rescue personnel at the Trade Center about 30 blocks from where we are right now. And you can see these huge columns of smoke coming off of the front tower and then a bit from the back. As you see, again, the crews working their way towards the tower themselves. It was 1993 that I suspect many of these same firefighters converged on these very same towers after the bombing in the garage level. Help me with this, but I'm pretty sure it was in the garage when a Ryder truck came in and blew up in the garage. I'm not sure it was a Ryder truck, but a truck came in and blew up in the garage, and that was in 1993.
Center, we heard a big bang, and then we saw smoke coming out, and everybody started running out, and we saw the plane on the other side of the building, and there was smoke everywhere, and people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know. And I don't know, everybody just doesn't know where to go. They won't let, everything is blocked off. You can't even, they're telling us to get out, but there's nowhere to go. And then I heard that another plane hit, and if you go over by there, you can see the people jumping out the window. They're jumping out the window right now. Oh my God.
All right, ma'am, thank you.
That is one of the...
All right, as you can hear, extraordinary scenes in the United States. The most extraordinary series, in fact...
Jet in the air over the Pentagon, headed to the west, where the plane was reportedly coming in from. Again, they're saying here that a second aircraft is expected to arrive at the Pentagon sometime soon. They take it seriously enough that they have scrambled at least one fighter jet that I saw, probably either from the D.C. Air National Guard or the Maryland Air National Guard, both of which fly F-16s. The west front of the building of the Pentagon along Route 27 has now partially collapsed. About a 60-foot section of the building laterally has collapsed the entire 5 stories. The building is obviously, the fire is traveling inward in the building toward the courtyard, and this wedge, as they call it, of the Pentagon, the westernmost wedge, which was just refurbished and was in fact reinforced for terrorist attack and for just this sort of thing. I know that there were a significant number of injuries. I'm unaware of any numbers on fatalities at this point. People here who came from the building are suggesting that surely there were fatalities, but no one could confirm any. I have spoken to a number of people that I know who pulled people out of rubble. There were severe injuries. There are a number of helicopters here evacuating injured people.
To Los Angeles from Dulles Airport, outside Washington, dives into the Pentagon, destroying one of the building's 5 sides.
I happened to heard a plane come through. It sounded like it was running normal.
10:10 a.m., the 4th hijacked plane, United 93 from Newark to San Francisco, crashes in a remote area 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh.
It just come down like it was going to land. Instead of landing, it just went nose straight into the ground.
In a little more than an hour, 4 horrific plane crashes, hundreds believed dead. But far worse was yet to come. At 10:05 a.m., the South Tower of the World Trade Center, possibly weakened beyond hope by the plane's impact, collapses. People can be seen jumping from the high floors.
The building came just rumbling down. It was like a war zone.
10:28 a.m., and the North Tower, choked with smoke and flames from its upper floors, disintegrates. Smoke and ash from the destruction combined to make parts of New York City look like ancient Pompeii after the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Rescue firemen were coated with thick white dust.
This is terrible. We lost tons of...
And tonight, while smoke from the collapse of the Twin Towers still lingered over New York City, most who saw and survived this day still had trouble believing what they saw. The phrase you heard over and over again was, "It seemed just like a movie."
We'll handle those tears and the trauma tonight for the victims, their families in Washington and here in New York City. Frank Donahue is with the disaster.
He says the number of casualties could be, quote, more than most of us can bear. Officials say establishing the final death toll could take weeks. At the Pentagon, investigators fear as many as 800 people were killed, although that figure may be downgraded a bit, as we just heard from Jim Sciutto on the scene there. Another hijacked jetliner slammed into the building shortly after the two jetliners slammed into the World Trade Center towers.
Of the investigation. According to people in the area, the plane was flying at a very low altitude when there was a rush of engine noise. At that time, the plane then turned and plunged at a 45-degree angle, crashing into a field which is part of a strip mining operation near the town here of Shanksville. FBI confirms there were 38 passengers and 7 crewmen on board. No survivors. There are only small pieces of debris to be found at the scene. At the crash site, there is an impact crater. It appears as a blackened pit on the edge of a green, grassy field. A key find will be the black box, the flight recorder. There are also reports the FBI is examining a 911 call originating from a passenger on the plane, taken by a 911 operator at a neighboring county here in Pennsylvania.
West of the Trade Center buildings and slammed into the second tower. That's what you just saw. Fire shooting out the north and east side of the tower. Shortly after that, we began to get reports of events taking place in Washington. An explosion, which first came to us as a fire at the Pentagon. Now there's a report of a second hijacked plane heading towards the Pentagon. It is believed that one of the planes, perhaps both, but one of them, we have been told, was an American Airlines 767 that hit one of the Trade Center towers. About a half an hour after that, perhaps a little bit longer, lose track of time a little bit in these situations, the first tower, or let me correct that, the south tower, the second tower, the one to the left, collapsed. It collapsed in a cascade of smoke and spark, and what we cannot tell you is if there was a second explosion that caused that collapse, or if it was simply, that's the first one, that's the south tower collapsing, and that was about a half hour, give or take, after the planes hit the tower. Then shortly after that, just as the smoke was starting to clear away, the second tower, and that's what you're looking at now. Again, this was not very long ago, 10, 15 minutes ago. The second tower, it almost looks like one of those implosions of buildings that you see, except there is nothing controlled about this. This is devastation. How many people? There are 50,000 people who normally go to work in the Trade Center buildings. How many of those people had arrived already? How many of those people were trapped on the upper stories? How many of those people have been hurt? How many of those people died? We cannot tell you now. We can tell you that hospitals throughout the New York area are receiving literally hundreds of patients, and they are performing triage. They are trying to figure out who could be treated, who needs help first. This is sort of standard operating procedure. We are just being told now that Israel has evacuated all its diplomatic missions around the world. Israel has evacuated its missions. We are told now that Yasser Arafat has condemned these attacks, and we don't know yet who's behind them. Britain has condemned these attacks. Germany has convened its National Security Council, and we will check and see if events are going on in those places or if that is simply a reaction to what has gone on here in Washington and in New York. CNN's Gene Meserve joins us on the phone from Washington. Gene.
Hay Street, which is one of the major thoroughfares here in Washington, it is absolute gridlock. It takes about 15 minutes to drive one block. Ordinarily, this time of day, there'd be nothing near this kind of traffic. You see pedestrians filling the sidewalks, many of the businesses and offices here having closed. You see cars absolutely pouring out of the parking lots, contributing to the absolutely horrendous traffic situation. Many people trying to use their cell phones. However, cell phone service has become very difficult in this town because of the crush on circuits. For the most part, people appear to be very calm and collected. I will tell you, though, that as I drove, I looked at the car next to me full of some young women who I would guess were in their 20s, several of them crying their eyes out, obviously very upset as they listened to the radio and heard the news of what is happening in this city in New York also. Aaron, back to you.
Gene, thanks. Gene Meserve in Washington this morning as she and the rest of The organization continues to gather what facts we can, what facts are available in the wake of the extraordinary chaos that has followed this extraordinarily horrendous terrorist attack. American Airlines, we are told, one of the planes involved in this was a hijacked American Airlines 767 out of Logan Airport in Boston. American Airlines will say what is known. What is known as you look at the White House being evacuated a short time ago, or is that live? And I'm not sure on my monitor which it is. I believe it's taped from a short time ago. In any case, American Airlines will talk to reporters in about a half hour or so, 11:30 Eastern time. One of its planes involved in this, and we will bring that press conference to you live when it happens. Here in New York, hospitals are being overwhelmed. As hundreds of patients are being brought in and being treated. We cannot tell you, we would not even begin to guess what the numbers in this will be, how many people will have died by the time this day is over, how many injuries have taken place in both Washington and New York. But as former Police Commissioner Howard Safer told us a few moments ago, obviously the numbers are going to be extraordinary. Who do we have on the phone, guys? Just help me out here. Patty, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
What do you got?
About an hour ago, I was on the corner of Broadway and Park Place. That's about 1,000 yards from the World Trade Center when the first tower collapsed. It was a massive explosion. At the time, the police were trying desperately to evacuate people from the area. When that explosion occurred, it was like the scene out of a horror film. People started stampeding away from it.
Patty, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. We told you there was a second plane that went down, this one around 80 miles or so southeast of Pittsburgh. We'll try now to connect with KDKA TV in Pittsburgh. Well, just so much for planning. We will try again. Again, we have reports that a plane has crashed in the Pittsburgh area, southeast of Pittsburgh, about 80 miles. And at varying times, we've heard that this was a 767 and a 747. I'm not sure it matters which it is. What matters is that a plane has crashed in the Pittsburgh area. The Pentagon continues to monitor reports that another plane, a hijacked plane, is headed for that area. All flights have been canceled around the country. International flights heading towards the United States are being diverted into Canada this morning. Patty, let me go back to you as we look at some tape from the ground. Patty, why don't you go ahead and continue?
Okay, Aaron, I'm in the main building of Pace University, which is inside the fallout zone of all the debris from the two building collapses. At the time of the first building collapse, I was at Broadway and Park Place. There was a huge cloud of smoke. It overcame the crowd. People were stampeding. Literally, the debris was so thick you could not see your hand in front of your face. I ducked around into a building that was on Park Place and Beekman Street. When I was in there, people were coming in, they were crying, they were wailing. You couldn't see anything outside. After the smoke had cleared a little bit, I came outside. The scene was like a ghost town in the financial district, very eerie. You saw people being wheeled on gurneys away from the site of the explosion. People were coming out with masks over their face, anything they could put over their face, because the air was still very thick with debris. The ash on the ground is at least 2 inches thick. It's more like snow cover, a very eerie snow cover blanketing downtown Manhattan right now. Now, at the time, I was back on the corner again of Broadway and Park Place. At that time, the police started running toward us, telling everybody to move who was left on the street. I looked up, and that's when I heard the, pardon me, that's when I heard the explosion. That's when the second tower came down. Again, whoever was left on the street started stampeding. I'm in the office. Right now, I'm in the main building of Pace University. People are crying. They have gas masks on their face. Authorities are making people go toward the basement. They're just doing anything that they can to move people away from the financial district. But again, it is a very horrifying scene down here, very eerie, like a ghost town.
Patty, let me interrupt you. Mayor Giuliani is on the telephone, is part of New York One's coverage. We join our affiliate for that.
Mayor Giuliani, since we have New Yorkers listening, and obviously their thoughts are with the people who are down there.
Urge them to remain calm, to remain at home, or to remain at their place of business, unless they're in Lower Manhattan. By that I mean south of Canal Street. If you're south of Canal Street, get out, walk, and walk slowly, carefully. There are plenty of police around, but just walk directly. If you can't figure out what else to do, just walk directly north. That'll get you out of the dangerous smoke area. It'll also do us a big favor. It'll open up those streets because we're going to be moving a large number of ambulances and emergency personnel in and out of there all day. I've talked to the governor. He is putting the National Guard on alert so that they can relieve our police officers and our firefighters later this afternoon. And we've asked the federal government for help from the urban search and rescue team. So right now, we're using all of our police and firefighters and emergency personnel to help the people down there. Later on, we're probably going to need reinforcements.
Mayor Giuliani, I realize that it must be more than a chaotic situation, particularly since the bunker has been compromised and cordoned off. But can you give us any sense? There are so many people watching now who must have loved ones down in that area and are concerned of the systematic...
My heart goes out to them. I've never seen anything like this. I was there from shortly after it happened and saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. It's a horrible, horrible situation. And all that I can tell them is that every resource that we have is attempting to rescue as many people as possible. And the end result is going to be some horrendous number of lives lost. I don't think we know yet. But right now, we have to just focus on saving as many people as possible.
Can you give us a sense of if there is, in fact, some system being implemented, what that system is, and where people are being taken?
People are triaging. People are being taken to every area hospital possible, even virtually within minutes. I drove down right past St. Vincent's Hospital, and I could see them actually on the street ready to take people, and that was within minutes of the first airplane hitting the World Trade Center. So the hospitals are ready. We'll be moving them to all different area hospitals, triaging them. The main thing is having those streets open so that we can get people in and out of the southern part of Manhattan as quickly as possible so that we can move them, to hospitals all over the city.
And Mayor Giuliani, we'll let you...
Is in place. They're doing it. We just need the cooperation of people in getting out of there.
We'll let you get back to the operations there, and we do appreciate you taking the time for us here.
But once again, the only thing to do now is to remain calm and try to assist in the rescue effort.
Thank you.
Now let's pray.
That's New York's Mayor Rudy Giuliani talking to a CNN affiliate New York One here, saying that clearly there's going to be tremendous number of lives lost on these attacks here in New York, urging people to stay calm and to leave the area calmly. The area is in the southern part of Manhattan, way down on the tip of Manhattan Island. The mayor urging people to calmly move north. CNN's Jamie McIntyre is at the Pentagon. Jamie, why don't you start, if you can, at the beginning here as we try and put some order to all of this. What happened?
Well, let me just describe the scene that we have here, and I'll back up a little bit. But right now I'm looking at the charred facade of the Pentagon, a huge gaping hole on the side where the Pentagon heliport is located, the side that faces Arlington Cemetery. In front of me is a long line of rescue personnel with backboards. They're just waiting for victims to be brought out so they can rush them to nearby medical facilities. I see a few victims being treated on the grass outside the Pentagon. Firefighters continue to pour streams of water onto the side of the building, and huge black cloud of smoke continues to billow out. It is a scene of utter destruction here. I'm sure it pales in comparison to the World Trade Center, but I've never seen anything like this myself in the history of the Pentagon. There's been nothing like this. Again, a huge gaping hole. You can see the exposed 5 floors of the Pentagon offices just ripped apart. Our report is that an aircraft of some kind, and at least one witness identified it as a civilian aircraft, hit the side of the building shortly after the incident in the World Trade Center this morning. People who were in their offices nearby reported hearing a huge explosion, seeing shards of shrapnel come by their window. The entire Pentagon has been evacuated. Short time after this attack, there were urgent announcements made over the loudspeaker telling people to quickly get away from the building because they had reports of a second plane heading this way just 2 minutes away. F-16 jets were scrambled over the Pentagon. I saw several of them go by, but no second plane ever materialized, and the building remained completely evacuated as firefighters continue to pour columns of water on the devastated side of the Pentagon, and rescue personnel continue to whisk victims away.
We have no report at this time of how many casualties. Clearly, dozens and dozens of people have been hurt, and we presume that there have been some deaths as well. It's hard to imagine otherwise, considering the extent of damage to the side of the building. And I can see just some of the windows side a stretch of the building, perhaps 40 or 50 feet wide. Just looks like it has collapsed under the weight of the impact. Aaron?
Worth of bulldozers and trying to clear away this wreckage. It could take weeks, however, they say, to find out the exact number of victims in this disaster. Less than 2 hours after the hijacked jets plowed into both those towers, the two towers crumbled to the ground. ABC's Robert Krulwich explains why.
Why did the towers collapse as quickly and as suddenly as they did? Engineers from the original firm that built the towers told ABC they can only guess at this point, but they believe that the collisions themselves, the plane hitting building number 1 and the plane that smashed into building number 2, by themselves, they did not cause the collapse. It was the fire, they say, the intense fire and heat from the explosions that brought the buildings down. Temperatures inside could have built up to 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, steel loses its strength, and steel beams connect every floor to the outside walls. As it got hotter, the beams got weaker, and the hot air inside began to push and press against the outside walls until the outside walls just buckled, snapped, and released the top floor, which fell onto the floor below, and the entire building sinks in a straight vertical, the floors falling faster and faster down, until you notice that every floor in the building is gone. Viewed from another angle, you can see the same thing. Notice the aerial stays vertical, just stays straight as it sinks into the building. There's no buckling or tipping, just straight down. And this happened in both buildings. The first tower, too, stayed straight as it went down, each floor falling neatly on top of the other. So the reason the towers went so quickly is because all the floors were literally hanging onto the skin. And once the skin went, the buildings went too. Robert Krulwich, ABC News.
Just these unbelievable scenes of people jumping out of the building. On about the 80th floor, just in those three or four floors that you could see that were alight, people were jumping to their death, presumably. It was an absolutely...
How many people were able to be evacuated after the first jet slammed into the first tower? At the Pentagon, officials fear hundreds were killed when another hijacked jetliner struck there. The military is responding by putting its forces all over the world on the very highest alert.
Trade Center.
Prue, we can assume you were on your way to work. We can assume that many thousands of people probably were in these two buildings, which now have both collapsed.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine there were thousands, and in the buildings around as well, because they would have, I would think, would have been underneath the towers as they collapsed. I mean, who knows how many got out? I had heard reports that it was quite orderly after the first crash, when the plane crashed, then the second plane crashed, and people, it got kind of out of control, and people were running outside.
Also dust from some of the demolition workers. They're trying to get some of the debris cleared away. So they've got that difficulty. They've also got the difficulty of the fact that the trade towers seem to have completely disintegrated, virtually completely disintegrated as they fell down upon themselves. There's almost nothing left of any of the floors. So they have a great density of wreckage as well.
All right, Bill Blakemore, thank you so much for that update down at Ground Zero.
Through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean, wide we home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Every day. We have no idea how many people were actually in the towers at the time of those two explosions that you're looking at right now. Officials say determining a final death toll could in fact take weeks. Again, at the Pentagon, still recapping, officials fear hundreds were killed when another...
And the Pentagon will be open for business. We now have new close-up pictures of the damage done by that plane, And Defense Secretary Rumsfeld had a grim warning that casualties will be high.
People have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
The first attack ever on the Pentagon occurred at 9:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
Clip, this ball over here hit another ball and slammed right into the building. Huge explosion, and then utter pandemonium, as you might imagine. I mean, everybody was screaming, "Oh my God!"
A hijacked American Airlines jet, which had just taken off from Dulles Airport, flew right up the main highway leading north into Washington and straight into the citadel of American military power.
There was no doubt about it. It was American Airlines slammed right into the building, and there was no doubt about it. Whoever was piloting that plane was aiming for the Pentagon.
Fearful that, like the World Trade Center, a second airliner was on its way, most of the building's 23,000 workers fled.
Plane's coming in. Come on. Let's go. Come on. We're not playing around here. Let's go.
F-16 fighters circled overhead looking for a second attack, but the damage had already been done. The plane had drilled a hole about a third of the way through the world's largest office building. The wounded were rushed to nearby hospitals as the fire spread and an entire section of the building collapsed, trapping many, many more inside.
Arlington search and rescue personnel are just now, and it's about almost 2 o'clock, just now gaining access to portions of the building where the plane hit because the fires were too intense.
One ray of hope. The Pentagon is undergoing a major renovation, and some of the offices in the path of the plane were vacant.
States has been evacuated from its headquarters in Langley, Virginia. There are some key personnel still in the headquarters, but the operations center has been moved elsewhere. U.S. officials saying they don't want to talk about where exactly the headquarters staff and operations staff has been moved to. But that staff is focusing now on trying to find any shred of information that could help the U.S. government figure out who is doing this and how to put a stop to it. Aaron?
David, you tell me if I'm right or wrong here. As a practical matter, there are not a whole lot of groups that the United States government knows about that are sophisticated enough, have the kind of money, the resources to pull off something like this. Fair enough?
That's absolutely true. And obviously, despite the denial, attention will quickly turn to the bin Laden group because it has long tentacles. It has connections with all sorts of other groups. We saw at the Millennium a group of Algerians apparently involved in trying to arrange bombings in the United States, and now there is evidence being produced in court sessions that those Algerians were working for the bin Laden group. So that group certainly will come under immediate suspicion. There are very few others that could have pulled this off.
U.S. military bases and embassies are at the highest state of alert.
That was David Martin from CBS.
Angle of the second plane hitting the tower. Let's look.
That's just a frightening shot.
Officials saying it's the fire that caused the buildings to disintegrate relatively quickly. You can imagine both very large planes carrying a lot of fuel, literally pumping that fuel right into those two towers.
These planes fully loaded with fuel. Yep. Every one of these planes was hijacked. All 4 of them was bound for a transcontinental flight, meaning they were fully loaded. Bombs, literally, petrol bombs that were plowed there into the World Trade Center and then also, of course, into the Pentagon.
All right, and also...
we talked earlier today about the movement of forces along the East Coast. Now we have information about the movement of naval assets on the West Coast. They are being moved to protect the West Coast and also Hawaii, according to Navy officials. Let me tell you what's being deployed. An aircraft carrier, 2 guided missile cruisers, 5 guided missile destroyers, 5 guided missile frigates, a rescue and salvage ship, and a fleet oiler. All of those vessels based on the West Coast. Once again, those being deployed along the West Coast and some further out, one presumes, to protect Hawaii. Earlier today, a couple of aircraft carriers left Norfolk, Virginia. They were deployed along with some other ships with the intention of protecting the East Coast. The aircraft carriers in particular, it was hoping could monitor and help control the airspace over both New York and Washington, D.C. And another note, the USS Enterprise, which had been relieved of duty in the Persian Gulf, has now been told it must stay there. So
panic. It was very grim-faced. As soon as the Pentagon came on fire, they started evacuating all the government buildings, including the White House, the State Department, the Treasury building, and Capitol Hill. And right where I am, which is about 3 blocks from the White House, and a police cordon was set up immediately. Sharpshooters were in Lafayette Park, just across the road from the White House. There's gridlock in the streets. I'm not sure if I look out the window now, it's still not really moving at all. There's a little bit of movement. People were very grim-faced, shaking their heads, could not believe what was going on. The other thing that was happening was many people were concerned for their children, because this happened at around about 9 o'clock in the morning, Washington time. Their children were in school.
Controls of both planes. While the rescue operation was just getting underway below, this aircraft too was flown straight into the second tower of the 110-story building. It was indeed a suicide mission of enormous magnitude.
Doorman goes to me, wow, I never seen a plane flying so low. And we looked out at it, all of a sudden, boom, it seemed like it wasn't even real.
This is the same scene from another angle, something witnessed by the tens of thousands of people all over New York, all watching a seemingly endless horror show happening right in front of them. The plane is coming in from the left.
Oh my God!
On the ground, a cameraman captured the moment of impact as well. Then he, with the thousands of others around him, ran to escape the deadly shower of debris. At this stage, it's impossible to get any idea of the casualty numbers, although the grim reality is the World Trade Center is the workplace of up to 50,000 people. And on any given day, another 80,000 tourists visit the sightseeing lookouts at the top of the towers. Although because it was early in the day,
we saw what we thought was debris, and we realized it was people jumping.
They started jumping out of the window, like the 96th floor. They just started, one at a time, in different parts of the building. I just started seeing people just drop. And I must have counted like 30 or 40 people, you know.
But the attacks were to continue. South in Washington, another hijacked passenger plane, a Boeing 757, was aimed directly at the Pentagon. This is the headquarters and strategic planning center for the United States military. A section of the building was blown apart, no doubt causing more deaths and injuries.
It came in at such a deep angle at such fast speed. It was, the severity of, I was telling the gentleman, it was a real severe intention is what it had to it. You could tell it was like a suicide bomber.
The recurring nightmare continued. A fourth passenger plane crashed in open land 120 kilometers from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That too was thought to be a victim of the terrorists. President Bush was not in Washington when the attacks occurred. He was in Florida, and soon after spoke to the nation and warned of difficult times ahead.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward.
Control Center on Air Force One, but do we know who's actually in overall control of the country at the moment?
Was attacked this morning by a faceless coward.
Control Center on Air Force One, but do we know who's actually in overall control of the country at the moment?
Well, the president is in control. That's the way it is. The next person in command would be the vice president, but the president who was campaigning in Florida yesterday and due to continue there today is flying back from, I believe, Sarasota, Florida to Washington. He would have his command center. If anything were to go wrong, the next person in charge is the vice president.
Okay, Jim, we're going to leave it there. Hopefully we'll be able to get on to the Prime Minister shortly. And we'll come back to the CNN coverage for the time being.
767 was involved in one of the hits on the Trade Center as well. We don't know if there's a reason why it is American and not any other. We won't speculate as to whether there is or not. We'll just tell you what the facts are as we get them, and that's what we have. American says 2 of its planes down, and I assume that is 2 other than the one that hit the Trade Center, and you guys check that out to make sure I'm right.
And we have a report of a crash in Somerset County.
Right. believe a 767, though we're getting reports perhaps a 747, which doesn't quite fit into what we believe flies Chicago to New York, is also down as well. And I do not know the airline involved there. Let me just go back on okay, I do now. It's a United Airlines plane. So we have a number of planes down, a number of planes involved in these attacks. The Boston to Atlanta, if I'm reading the notes correctly, had an American 767 with 81 passengers down. That's American Airlines Flight 11 and American Airlines Flight 77, which is a 757 jetliner, Dulles Airport outside of Washington to Los Angeles International, with 58 passengers on board, 4 flight attendants, 2 pilots also reported down. And then there is this United Airlines jet which crashed about 80 miles to the southeast of Pittsburgh.
We should also mention, I think, Aaron, that inevitably some of these early fragmentary reports are going to be needing correction, and that will be done as soon as possible. We had a report of a second hijacked plane on the way to Washington. Capitol Police were reporting that there have been no signs of that plane. We simply, at this point in this awful story, have to just tell our viewers we will do everything we can to report this accurately. If fragmentary reports need amending or correcting, that will be done immediately.
And I think in fairness here, there is in a number of places right now, perhaps 4 or 5, chaos. And numbers that come out aren't necessarily going to hold up. And in our reporting, we will be a bit conservative on some of this until we track it down. There's no point in allowing this thing to seem worse than it is. It is already horrendous, and we don't need to make it any worse by misstating numbers, and we want you to keep that in mind. CNN Medical Unit reports that the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, the Centers for Disease Control, is preparing bioterrorism teams to respond to the incidents. This, we are told, is simply precautionary. We have absolutely no reports and no evidence that there is any biochemical or bioterrorism going on, but clearly what is happening in every department of the United States government, and I suspect in every department of most major cities right now, the plan that they hope they never have to implement, the plan that they spent years preparing, is now in effect, not just here, not just in Washington, but around the country, because no one knows precisely where this is going. CNN, my colleague Judy Woodruff joins us from Washington. Judy?
Aaron, we've been watching this here in the Washington Bureau. I'm in the studio now, just a few blocks from the Capitol, from the United States Capitol, and the first thing I want to tell you is that everyone, I'm sure, on their minds is God rest the souls of those who've lost their lives this morning in New York, in Washington, near Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. It is just a story for which there are no words to describe. Here in Washington, we are keeping a very close watch on the Pentagon. You've been reporting, Aaron, and other CNN correspondents. A plane evidently crashed, a commercial jetliner crashed into the Pentagon earlier this morning. Approximately 60-foot section of this building, which is, of course, the headquarters of all the military for the United States, was on fire as a result of this crash, and then collapsed. These are some of the pictures we've been bringing our audience from the Pentagon. We've watched people being treated by first aid personnel there. We have no information yet on casualties, on the number of people who may have been hurt or may have died in this incident, although emergency personnel on the scene have said surely there have been casualties there. Elsewhere in Washington, every federal building has been evacuated or is in the process of being evacuated. I'm now told that United Airlines is now saying that flight, can you tell me the number of the flight? 93 has crashed in Pennsylvania. Now, a flight from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco. Now, we don't know if this is the same airplane that Aaron was reporting a little earlier crashed in Somerset County near Pittsburgh. Aaron had reported that some minutes ago, and now we are getting a confirmation from United Airlines that its flight United 93 on the way to San Francisco has crashed. So we now have at least 2 commercial airline companies in the United States. American Airlines reporting 2 of its passenger jets down, one flight Dulles in Washington to Los Angeles, and then another flight from Boston to Los Angeles down, and now we have United Airlines reporting at least 1 airline or airliner down with concern about another one. So the pieces of this story continue to come together. I have to say, in my 30 years as a journalist, I have never seen anything like this, never covered a story of the dimensions of this, and I'm sure it's safe to say that's the case for my colleague Aaron Brown and for any one of the other many correspondents, producers, and others with CNN and our colleagues at the other news networks. And I would just remind you that CNN right now has producers, correspondents all around the world who are watching for any more information that we can bring you at this point. As Aaron and Jeff Greenfield have been saying in the last few minutes, everything we have right now is fragmentary. We are simply reporting to you what we are learning from police, from the federal government, from the CIA, from David Ensor, from our other correspondents. And I'm now told that former U.S. Army Commander General Wesley Clark is joining us on the telephone. Former commander of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is joining us from Little Rock, Arkansas. General Clark, from your knowledge of the military, you know the Pentagon. What are you thinking right now?
Well, good morning, Judy. First of all, we've got to try to assess what's really happening, and as all of the news reports indicate, it's clearly a coordinated effort. It wasn't announced, and it hasn't been announced that it's over, and we don't know how it will finally conclude, so there's likely to be more trouble before all of this concludes. So we've got to protect the American people first. We've got to look after those who are injured. We've got to take precautionary measures to deal with future incidents. And I think all of that's underway with a lot of responsible action by people everywhere. The damage at the Pentagon is unclear from all the news reports that I've seen. The one report that said it crashed into the Army side of the building. There are command centers in various places of the Pentagon, and there are many other alternate command centers. So I don't think there's really any issue about the command and control of the United States Armed Forces. I'm sure that's very solid right now.
General Clark, why do you say there's likely to be more trouble?
Well, we're hearing still reports of aircraft that are out there. There's no way of knowing when all of the possible incidents have either taken place or been aborted by whoever it is that's behind this. And so we have to be ready for whatever might happen next.
General, can you give us some sense of, clearly the United States has never experienced anything of this magnitude, but what are the leaders of our military, the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense and others, what presumably are they doing right now in order to be on top of a situation where you have the Pentagon on fire, New York City in a state of chaos, and every federal building in Washington evacuated?
Well, first of all, we'll be trying to assess what happened. We'll be making sure that the protection posture of our bases worldwide and all of our units out there is raised so that we're able to protect our forces and our family members, and then we'll be looking to provide assistance to wherever such incidents might occur. Whatever military capabilities there will be that could be of use will be certainly made available to the other agencies of state, local, and federal government who are involved in trying to deal with these tragedies right now. Then beyond that, we'll be waiting for the information to come in about who may have been behind this, and we'll be looking at what measures can be taken to strike and prevent further actions or in punitive retaliation.
Well, speaking of that, General Clark, wouldn't you agree there are very few of the terrorist groups, at least that we're familiar with, who would have the capability to pull off something this coordinated on this scale?
I think that's exactly right. There's only one group that has ever indicated that it has this kind of ability, and that's Osama bin Laden's. So obviously that'll be the first suspicion.
Are you, clearly we are all in a state of shock, General Clark, but is it fair to say that you're not truly surprised by this, given what we've heard from that particular group? And again, we don't know who's behind this, but given what we do know.
Well, there have been many threats made against the United States and threats of terrorism, and we know that the World Trade Center has been a target. We know that aircraft have been hijacked, and we know that car bombings are used in many places in the world. And there's no doubt that for a long time there have been groups who have tried to target the United States. Normally, many times we've gotten indications. We've been able to take actions that the American public never knows about that have broken up these attempts. In this case, for whatever reason, we didn't have the information and we weren't able to take the actions to break it up.
And General, what do you say to those Americans who are looking at these horrific pictures that they've been watching now for almost 3 hours on television, who are thinking, will I ever feel safe again in an airplane, in a tall building in this country?
I think that that will be one of the primary issues that has to be addressed by government leaders, is how to restore ever a sense of normalcy to the country. Will it ever be the same? And that's a question everybody will be asking. But I think it's too soon to expect any answers to that. I think we've got to assess this. We've got to track this down. I think one thing that comes through very clearly now is if this is terrorism and international terrorism, then clearly there has to be a much greater degree of cooperation between nations to deal with this. Whoever did this lives somewhere. He's supported by someone, and people know him. And someone knew that these events were being planned. And if we didn't have that information, we should have. And I think that's one resolve that will come out of this from nations all over the world, that more has to be done collectively together.
But in a large sense, General Clark, whoever was behind this has clearly succeeded in the most horrific and devastating way.
Well, it's been a tragedy for America, there's no doubt about that, and for so many people and their families, our hearts go out to them.
General, we're looking, as I'm talking with General Wesley Clark, who is a former NATO commander. He's talking to us from Arkansas. We're looking at helicopters patrolling. I believe it's the area around the Pentagon, although I can't tell by the banner across the lower part of the screen. We do know that President Bush was in Florida this morning. He abruptly cut his trip short in order, we think, to fly back to Washington. And General Clark, while you are with us, what would the plans be for the president in this situation without giving away secure information? Would the president necessarily return to Washington? Is there always a plan in place in these situations?
Well, there would have to be a plan always in place to take the president to where he can best control what's going on and monitor it and make decisions, and also where he will be safe. And you can be sure that there are plans and backup plans and alternate plans to the backup plans. There'll be no shortage of efforts underway to assure his safety and his ability to maintain the continuity of government.
And once again, just finally, General Clark, as we look at these live pictures of the Pentagon, describe for us what you know of the section of the building that evidently was hit by the commercial jetliner.
Well, that picture seems to be from the area of the bridges, the 14th Street Bridge, looking at the corner of the Pentagon that is opposite from where the strike was. So it looks like the strike hit between the 4th, 5th, maybe 6th corridors of the Pentagon. Perhaps on the Army side of the building, there are a number of offices there, administrative offices, where Army leaders and staff officers work on a daily basis. They deal with things like planning and logistics and congressional relations and public affairs in that area. And the Army leadership was probably close to where that may have impacted. There are a number of other facilities below ground, some of which have been relocated, and it's impossible to see from that picture what the condition might be there.
General Clark, any final word before we let you go?
Well, I think that we've known for some time that there were groups planning this, and I think the American people should know that the men and women in government and all the agencies have worked very hard and very diligently against this. Obviously, we didn't do enough. We didn't either have the tools or the cooperation or somehow get the information that we needed to have prevented it. And you can be sure that those men and women are right now resolved to do more and to be more effective. This is a national challenge, and I'm confident that we'll meet it.
All right, General Wesley Clark joining us now from Little Rock, Arkansas. He is, of course, the former commander of NATO. General Clark saying earlier, in his estimation, there is likely to be more trouble given the coordination and the scale of these devastating attacks this morning, September the 11th, 2001, on New York City and on Washington, D.C., and at least 4 commercial jetliners involved in these different attacks. Patty Davis, our Washington correspondent, here with me in the studio. Patty, you have some information about one of those airliners.
That's right, Judy. Well, United Airlines, as you said earlier, is confirming that its Flight 93, that's a Boeing 757, it was en route from Newark to San Francisco, did crash near Pittsburgh. It is also now saying that it is deeply concerned about another flight, that is United Flight number 175, a Boeing 757 that was traveling from Boston to Los Angeles. It said it is deeply concerned about that flight right now. We don't know the status of that particular flight right now. Now, the United Airlines CEO, James Goodwin, saying that the thoughts of everyone at United are with the passengers and crews of these flights, including prayers. United is not saying how many people on board each of these flights, how many flight attendants, how many pilots. So at this point, that is their statement. They're saying one plane. They are confirming Flight 93 that was from Newark to San Francisco crashed near Pittsburgh. Another flight deeply concerned about United Flight 175, Boston to Los Angeles. That's a Boeing 767. Now, on a typical day, there'd be some 4,000 flights of all different aircraft, including military, general aviation, commercial aircraft in the skies. As we've reported here on CNN, the FAA has issued a ground stop, the first ever on all departing flights in the United States.
I'd begin. In the United States, Robert Penfold, National 9 News.
Robert joins us now from America. And what's the latest on the rescue efforts?
In New York, it's known there are many victims still trapped and alive under the collapsed skyscrapers. One woman even received a mobile phone call from her brother who said he and 3 New York policemen were trapped in a basement and were still awaiting rescue. The death toll? Well, in New York, the president hinted at thousands dead, and in Washington, where they have been able to get into the rubble of the Pentagon, they say there are no longer any survivors there, and the death toll could be anywhere from 500.
In New York, both towers have since collapsed. The US President George W. Bush says it appears to be an act of terrorism and has vowed an all-out hunt for those responsible. The FBI is investigating a possible plane hijacking ahead of the crash. Minutes after the Trade Center attack, a plane crashed into the Pentagon, engulfing that building in fire and smoke and forcing the evacuation of all staff. Capitol Hill has also been rocked by an explosion. The White House and the State Department have both been evacuated. Airports across the country have been shut down for at least 7 hours under national ground stop orders. The bridges and tunnels into Manhattan are all closed. John Howard, we have just heard, has arrived at the Australian Embassy in Washington, and we're hoping to make contact with him shortly.
Quake in Christchurch, 22 people
deceased in our care.
and we are systematically, the biggest concern we have is returning the wrong loved one.
To half the foundations and footing of Grand Chancellor, I expect at some point within the next 24, 40.
Transportation or their own transportation out of the airport. Leaving the airport? No.
How long do you anticipate the airport to be closed?
It's indefinite this time. We'll be meeting with the FAA. We'll be conducting an analysis of our intelligence that we have. We'll make a determination later on this afternoon.
What detail?
Pardon me? I can just tell you briefly, we have shut down security checkpoints. We've moved everyone away from the boarding gate areas. We've increased police presence dramatically. We've requested additional state police be sent to the airport. And we've shut down some construction activities around the airport.
Is this the highest level of security ever, Joe?
Is another flight from Boston?
I can't confirm or deny that right now.
Was there anything unusual about the boarding procedure of this flight?
I don't have any reports that would say the same.
Are you investigating breaches of security? How are you getting to the bottom of this hijacking?
I can tell you we have an ongoing investigation right now. Just an initial investigation being conducted with Massport, Massachusetts State Police, and the FBI.
What do you know about United Airlines Flight 175, which is unaccounted for right now from out of Boston?
I don't have any, can't confirm or anything or deny anything on that.
Joe, did they got a number?
No, they have not.
Joe, did Flight 11 leave on time? Were there any delays? And was there any conversation between the pilot and the tower that seemed unusual?
Flight number 11 left at 7:59. I believe it was on time. And everything went as scheduled when it left Logan Airport.
How many people were on board?
I don't have a passenger count right now.
Are you aware of any communications from the pilot?
No, I'm not.
What is flight path to LA normally is taken it south, or towards New York, south of the west?
I can't answer that. I don't have any information on that flight path.
When did the tower here detect that there was something wrong?
Again, I don't have that specific information.
You know what time
before it wasn't?
I don't know.
You know what time this United flight left?
I have no information on the United flight right
How
now.
unusual would it be for New York that we're heading to?
Again, I'm not familiar with the particular flight path they may have filed.
Was it a non-stop flight to Los Angeles?
I believe it was.
At what time, sir, were the flights stopped in Logan? What time? What time was the airport shut down?
I believe we shut the airport down to arriving flights somewhere around 9:15, and departing flights shortly after that.
What happened to the flights that were in the air? Where are they?
They were diverted to other airports.
How long will the airport be down? How long?
Again, we're going to assess all the measures that we've taken. We want to, obviously, the safety and security of anyone who works here at the airport, any of our passengers, is a top priority.
Do you have a lot of baggage that hasn't been flown?
That's Joe Lawless, part of the security effort at Boston's Logan Airport. A number of the planes that have been involved in this extraordinarily horrendous event today began their day in Boston. The Boston airport, like airports now across the entire country, is closed. Every airport in the country closed. International flights, as you heard Mr. Lawless say, being sent to Canada as they approach the United States. These are scenes, this is tape from the ground, and obviously this is unedited tape, so kind of bear with us. It's a little raw at this point, but this was on the ground at the around the trade center here in New York as the events began unfolding. And as you can see there, you can see that huge hole in the building of the Trade Center, both buildings standing at the time. You can see that where the plane, it almost looks like it came through the entire building.
And Aaron, we should remember what Wesley Clark told Judy Woodruff a couple of minutes ago about how much U.S. authorities have been worried about such an attack, how hard they've worked to try to fight it, how something may have gone wrong. And I believe we have on the phone right now someone who, both in fact and fiction, has dealt with justice, and that's author Tom Clancy.
Mr. Clancy, this is I guess, a terrible case of life imitating art.
I suppose you could say that. It's a noteworthy incident. I mean, it's not the sort of thing it's the sort of thing that's best left in a novel rather than in real life. Unfortunately, one of the problems with being an author is keeping up with reality.
But Mr. Clancy, you also are very well plugged into this world. From your own knowledge, how concerned have the authorities been that something of this scale could possibly hit on American soil?
It's Jeff Greenfield, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, Jeff, you've been here to the house. I mean, it's. I had a conversation some years ago with an Air Force general about the possibility rather like this, and I ended up putting in one of my books where you go where a bad guy takes an aircraft into the Capitol building during a joint session of Congress, which could effectively decapitate the whole government. And at the time it seemed rather humorous. I said, surely you've thought about things like this. And he said, well, to the best of my knowledge, nobody in my office has looked at this, but I promise you Monday morning they will be. Presumably they've been, they've considered this possibility for some time. The big problem is a person who's willing to lose his own life in voluntarily in a terrorist incident. The people like that are fairly rare, because self-preservation is indeed the first law of nature, and not too many people are willing to throw their lives away, and those who do it generally do it for religious reasons because they think there's something good waiting for them on the other side of death. In a case like this, that's going to lean people towards talking about, Islamic fanatics. But we need to remember that, Islam is a religion, and it's a religion with beliefs not terribly different from Judaism or Christianity. Or they believe in a God of love and justice the same as we do, and they're not all maniacs. And religious tolerance is one of the principles of our country. We need to hold on to that principle very tightly right now, because it's the principles you hold on to when things are tough that really count.
Fair point.
This was an act by a small number of madmen, and madmen don't characterize any part of humanity.
Tom, it's Aaron Brown. When you would talk to these officials in doing the research, did they see an attack of this enormity, or were they more concerned with these sort of devastating but smaller kind of hit and miss attacks that we've seen over the last 7-8 years?
Well, you don't ordinarily expect terrorists to display this degree of expertise. Flying an airplane is not all that easy. Kidnapping or hijacking an airplane, particularly with the safeguards we have at the airports right now, is not a trivial exercise. But unfortunately, the security you have at airports is not perfect, because nothing human beings do is perfect. Somebody thought very carefully and hard and long about this, and then they got some madmen to actually take control of the aircraft.
Tom, stay with me for a second. We a few moments ago told our viewers that United Airlines was concerned about another. United lost a flight near Pittsburgh earlier today, and officials said they were also concerned about United Flight 175, Boston to Los Angeles, and now we have reports that concern was justified. A second plane has gone down, United Flight 175. Again, that was from Boston to LA. And as you look at the Pentagon, which was also hit by a plane earlier in the day. Jeff?
Yes, Tom, you were mentioning that this is such a rare act, and yet we now know of at least 4 commercial airliners that apparently were hijacked and either crashed or crashed into buildings, causing death and havoc of an unimaginable scale. So whoever is behind this is of a dimension that literally dwarfs even fantasy.
Pretty much. I dreamed pretty big when I dreamed, and fortunately or unfortunately, it didn't get quite this large. It's not, generally speaking, it's not credible to think that you're going to find more than one person who's willing to do something like this, because people who are willing to throw their lives away are fairly rare. In this case, they got somebody who was well organized and produced a well planned and reasonably well executed operation.
Well,
now we need to find out who it was, and then to go after him. But that's going to take time. But we do have the people to do that if they have the proper support from the executive branch of the government and from the general population of our country to identify, locate, and deal with the people who performed this act.
The president said earlier today, shortly after the Trade Center attacks, the president characterizing these as terrorist attacks and said that the United States government will do whatever it is necessary to hunt down those people responsible. I think it is fair to say, Tom, Jeff, all of you on the line here, it is fair to say that what we know is that this is an extraordinarily large operation, and what we don't know, in a way, is just how big it is. It seems that at each passing moment or so, we get another report of another incident, and our instinct tells us that they are all connected. We have a number of planes down, 2 American airline jets, 2 United jets down. We have a plane that hit the Pentagon. We had 2 that hit the Trade Center. You're talking about something that is, I think it's fair to say, Jeff, it is beyond anything any of us could possibly have imagined. I think that those of us who dealt with Oklahoma City, those of us who dealt with the Trade Center here in '93, as we both did, you say, that is awful what happened. And you look at what appears to be playing out today, and we have no idea yet what the loss of life will be, certainly in the hundreds. We know that hospitals here in New York are overwhelmed with people being brought there all over the city of New York and beyond.
The only piece of news that is the least bit, I guess, reassuring is that there is no report of any kind of chemical result. That is, the folks on the ground around the World Trade Center, the rescue crews, the survivors, there is absolutely no indication at this moment that there was any kind of bioterrorism involved. Not that what happened here isn't horrific enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just add on again, small, medium-sized pieces of information as we go. All airlines in the country are closed down. All airports in the country are closed down. We now are being told that the U.S.-Mexican border has been sealed. We don't know if that is just simply part of a plan that the government puts into effect under a worst-case circumstance. This is certainly that, or if there is some specific reason why a decision was made to shut down that border. Our senior White House correspondent, John King, on the phone. John. John? John King, can you hear me? It's Aaron.
I hear you, Aaron.
What have you got to report for us?
Aaron, I'm standing across from the White House. I'm told by Secret Service and administration sources that all of the principals, all of the protectees, meaning the President, the Vice President, the First Lady, and Mrs. Cheney, are safe. They do not want us disclosing their locations, but I am told by a senior administration official that the plan and the priority is to get President Bush back to the White House as soon as they believe it is safe. Now, there are both operational and political reasons for wanting to do that. The White House Situation Room, in the view of White House officials, is the best place from which to monitor events and direct any operations. And that is a fortified structure within the White House compound where we know the Vice President was when everyone else was evacuated from the premises earlier. Again, the Secret Service does not want to confirm for us for security reasons, or administration officials the same, tell us where those people are now, although I was told a short time ago the Vice President is still in a position to be monitoring and directing the response to these developments, and that the President, who is en route back to Washington, we're told Andrews Air Force Base is on full alert. I was also told that there are extra precautions that were taken to ensure the President's flight back to Washington was a safe one. Now, you can read into that additional fighter jet escorts, Air Force One always has some escorts with it, that additional fighter jet escorts were put up for that. Now, the political reason they want to get the President back to the White House is rather obvious. The White House believes this has been a tragic terrorist attack, and they want to send the signal that the President is back on the job at the White House. Priority one, though, officials say, is to guarantee that he can be safely brought back to the White House. And in the past half hour or so, we have seen security precautions on the street, checks being taken out on the street, on the grounds around the White House. There are snipers up on the roofs of the White House itself, including buildings around it. And a military helicopter gunship flew over the premises not that long ago, about 15 minutes ago now, and then it circled back over toward the Pentagon, where from my location you can still see smoke coming into the sky from there. But we are told the Vice President is still in a position to monitor all this as the President makes his way back.
John, thank you. Our senior White House correspondent, John King. As John mentioned, the president was in Sarasota, Florida, making his way back to Washington. Whether he'll be taken directly to the White House or not is a little bit unclear. Secret Service wants to make sure the building is safe. It is, I would add, one other symbolic reason why you would want to get the president in the White House, and that's to send a message to who's ever responsible for this, that yes, you've caused extraordinary damage and a great deal of tragedy here, but what you haven't done is shut down the American government. The president will want to get home. Governor George Pataki of New York joins us on the telephone. Governor, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
What are you hearing from the Trade Center area itself?
Well, we're still hearing that it's a horrific situation. We're in desperate need of people to help out with emergency services. The city team is there, but we've activated our National Guard and our statewide fire and emergency services, and we're going to be bringing those in to relieve the city forces as the afternoon goes on. I've been in touch with the mayor, I've been in touch with the White House, and everything that we can do and everything that can be done is being done at this point.
Has anyone given you any idea of how many injured we are dealing with down in
Not at this point. At this point, the sole goal is to try to help as many people as possible, to get them to the emergency services, to get them the care they need, to help people who want to leave the area to leave in an orderly way, and to make sure we do everything we can to provide security throughout the city and throughout the state.
And Governor Pataki, can you tell me the degree to which the state's planning for these sorts of tragedies, and there's obviously a plan in place, and New York is, because of its place in the world, is obviously a place you have to consider a target, whether that plan envisions something of the magnitude of what has taken place this morning?
Well, you plan for any eventuality, but you never actually expect to see something of this magnitude. But we have coordinated well with the city. We're going to continue to make sure we provide all the support we can. We do have emergency services and emergency transportation running. I know the reports have been inaccurate. We do have limited rail service out of Grand Central to the northern suburbs, limited rail service out of Brooklyn and Queens to Long Island. We're working to make sure that bus service, to the extent possible, continues, and we're trying to get subway service back on track. It's not there yet, but the coordination has been excellent. It's just an attack of this magnitude. We just have to focus on responding and helping people at this point.
And do you have any idea how many people have been hospitalized or how many hospitals are involved, whether they extend beyond the city?
Not at this point, but every emergency service, every hospital that can provide assistance is providing assistance. The people have been just terrific in their response, and we're going to continue to make sure that response is as strong as it can be.
Governor, take a moment and tell me, not as the governor necessarily, but as a resident of this state, an important player in the affairs of this state, what you're thinking today?
This is an enormous tragedy. I have friends in those towers. I have friends who were there this morning that we haven't heard from. And our thoughts go to the people who are there, to their families, to all those who are suffering at this time, and we will be there to help, and we will be there to do everything we can to make sure that the support and the services necessary are provided.
Governor, thank you. Governor George Pataki joining us here. The National Guard has been activated to support New York City Police. Andrea Koppel is on board a flight with the Secretary of State. Andrea, what are you hearing from officials there?
Well, Aaron, Secretary Powell has been in Peru since last night. He was here to attend the Organization of American States General Assembly. Obviously, when he got the news of the attacks in the United States, his aides scrambled to prepare things for him to leave. We are now, as you say, on board his plane. We're about to take off from Lima to head back to Washington. While at the OAS General Assembly, Secretary Powell said it was a terrible tragedy that had fallen on all who believe in democracy, but he said that will never kill the spirit of the American people. He also said that America will bring those responsible to justice, Aaron. There was also a minute of silence at the Organization of American States, and Secretary Powell obviously had to abruptly change his plans. He was supposed to be leaving Peru later this afternoon to head on to Colombia for his first trip there. But obviously, the attacks in the United States have changed that, and he's headed back to Washington. Aaron?
Andrea, give me a sense of the Secretary's demeanor. I mean, we know this is a man who has been through a lot in his life, has seen a lot in his life. Did he appear shaken to you?
I would say that Secretary Powell is someone who doesn't show his emotions in that way. This is a man with 35 years of military experience, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, former National Security Advisor himself, who's seen a lot in his day. And so I would say that obviously he appeared somber, very serious, but in terms of any other emotion, I would say that he's able to keep that very close to his chest.
Andrea, thank you. Andrea Koppel, flying back with the Secretary of State from South America. Our colleague Judy Woodruff in Washington. Judy?
Aaron, we have joining us now on the phone from the Pentagon our military affairs correspondent, Jamie McIntyre. Jamie, I understand you are inside the perimeter of where the commercial jetliner came down at the Pentagon. Well, it appears that we may have lost the phone connection with Jamie McIntyre. We're going to try to get that restored immediately. Jamie, are you there? Now we have Bob Franken, our Washington correspondent, joining us from the Pentagon. Bob, tell us what you are seeing there.
Well, what we're seeing, of course, in back of me is the smoke that's coming from the west side of the Pentagon, where, as we now know, a plane which is believed to have been a jumbo jet crashed into the Pentagon. It has left a hole. There was a collapse of that side of the building. You're seeing the smoke, of course, to my rear. We're reporting from an east side vantage point along a highway that's a major artery here. It is also a place where there has been a constant alert looking skyward, repeated concerns that another plane was heading this way up toward the Potomac. These have been concerns that have been out there for a couple of hours. None of them have been realized yet. Of course, the tragedy was that at about 9:20 this morning Eastern time, that plane crashed into the west side of the Pentagon. You can see overhead frequently helicopters that are circling the area, of course, looking to provide some visual sighting in case anybody, any sort of invader, anything like that, wants to take to the air. It's interesting, these helicopters also will hover on the ground. There are any number of highways here, and they would be looking for suspicious vehicles, that type of thing. We are told there are casualties at the Pentagon. We have not been able to get an accurate figure. We are not exactly sure at the moment of the whereabouts of the Secretary of Defense, but the building has virtually been evacuated, if not totally evacuated. There is heavy security there, investigations going on as they try and find out what happened. We constantly see sirens and hear sirens and see ambulances go by, many of them from Walter Reed Military Hospital on the other side of Washington, clearly going in there to help with whatever casualties there are. We also have seen a couple of times F-16s, at least one F-16 flying overhead a couple of times. That was reported as to be the case of the Pentagon scrambling fighter jets in case another plane was heading this way. But as I said, right now, there has been no evidence of another plane coming this way. They're on full alert, of course, and trying to now recover from the severe damage that hit the other side of the building. Judy?
All right, Bob Franken, I just want to remind our viewers that the section of the Pentagon that was hit was between the 4th, 5th, and 6th corridors. This confirmed apparently a little earlier today by Wesley Clark, General Clark, a former NATO chief. He said from what he could tell, it appears this was the Army section of the Pentagon, planning and logistics area where certainly Army leaders would have been working in their offices. I want to read for you now a statement from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, quoting, "We are outraged at this cowardly attack on the people of the United States. Our heartfelt prayers are with the victims and their families, and we stand strongly united behind the President as our Commander-in-Chief." And I want to clarify that this is a statement by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I want to clarify that this is from the leadership of the Congress. I misunderstood when I was handed this just a moment ago. And continuing, congressional leaders, we will work with the president to ensure that the full resources of the United States government are brought to bear to protect the American people and to punish the perpetrators of these unconscionable acts. May God bless America. And just quickly, before I go back to Aaron Brown in New York, hospitals in Washington dealing with the casualties from the Pentagon Washington Hospital Center, 29 patients, a blood shortage, we are being told, in Washington. So any of you who are able to get to a hospital anywhere in the Washington area, it is very possible that there is a need for blood to be donated. So we will just put that information out there as well. Aaron, now back to you in New York.
Judy, thanks. We now are being told that Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, has been evacuated. Again, this is another one of those multi-terminal airports. It's an enormous airport, and that is being evacuated. At least one of the flights, and perhaps two, if memory serves me, that has gone down today was headed towards Los Angeles, one towards San Francisco. We also have a report that Disney World in Orlando has been evacuated. Someone said to me a moment ago, before the day is over, everything's going to be shut down. And that seems to be where we're headed. CNN's Richard Roth is on the streets of New York, and he can join us now. Richard, what can you tell us?
Aaron, New Yorkers think they've seen everything, but they'll say they're amazed at what has happened, stunned. Right now behind me, what normally would be the World Trade Center is no more, a huge cloud of white smoke. And right now it's like a war zone. Thousands of New Yorkers streaming north. The mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, has told everyone to get north of Canal Street. We're several miles north of it. Right now, New Yorkers are trying to get out of Manhattan. There's a ferry on the west side going to New Jersey. It's really the only access out. The mayor advising that people should take the subways. We have seen dozens of emergency vehicles, hundreds, firemen being bussed in, decontamination vans coming in, call for blood donations. New Yorkers, their faces, their expressions, stunned, amazed right now. With us, several of those people who witnessed some of the carnage today. Tell us what you saw when you exited the subway station due to a lack of smoke. Eileen.
It was very smoky, and then we exited on Church Street out of the PATH train station. I crossed over to Church and Fulton, and I was trying to get a cell phone. I was trying to get up the block, and I turned around and saw this tremendous fire. I actually thought it was a bomb. I couldn't see a plane, and I saw people jumping off the building. Many people just jumping. And in a panic, I had my bag and my cell phone and everything, and I was trying to find a phone because the cell phone wasn't working. Everybody was screaming, everybody was running, the cops were trying to maintain the calm, and in that haste, people were stampeding. People started screaming that there was another plane coming. I didn't see the plane, but I turned around, and the second building just exploded. And again, all the debris was flying towards us. There was a woman on the ground with her baby. People were stampeding the baby. Myself and another man threw ourselves over the baby and pushed into the building. I got up and I just ran. I ran towards City Hall, and I said, oh God, why am I running there? And then I started to run towards the water. And then I was by probably Spring Street Prince Street. I was at a payphone, and I heard the rumbling. I thought it was another bomb. I thought it was another building close to me. And then I just ran from the payphone. The man is grabbing me back, telling me to stay here, you're safe. I was like, no way, I'm getting out of here, go north. And then I ran into a shoe store because I wanted to call my husband. That's all I wanted to do, was let him know I was alive, because he knew I was in the World Trade. And I got my office, and they connected me to my husband, and then we heard the second fall of the World Trade Center. And I'm astonished by the bombing. I just want to make a statement that these New York policemen and firemen, God bless them, they kept us calm. They tried so hard to keep us moving north, and it was just absolute horror. It was horror.
Working closely with the city, with our National Guard forces coming in to help relieve the city police and fire. Obviously, it's a situation that just cries out for people to be horrified. But what we have to do at this point is focus on helping those who are at risk, helping those who have been injured, making sure there's an orderly removal from Lower Manhattan, and that is our focus at this point.
Governor, are you in a position to go to the scene? Are you in a position to go to Lower Manhattan? Do you think you should? Would you like to? Or are you locked down?
No, I'm in the city, but the important thing is to be able to stay in contact with the White House, with City Hall, with our statewide emergency services. We've gotten offers of support from all the surrounding states with their emergency services, and the critical thing right now is to be able to coordinate to make sure that the response is the strongest and the most compassionate it can be for the people whose lives are still at risk. And we're mobilizing National Guard units from across the state. We're getting help from the surrounding states and coordinating with the city, and that's what we have to do at this point.
And Governor, what have you done about the other so-called high-profile potential targets in New York City, like the UN and the bridges and things like this? Are they all evacuated and locked down now?
UN's evacuated. The tunnels have been closed. The George Washington Bridge is open under security for emergency services coming in and people going out. We've shut down most of the mass transit. Grand Central is open under very tight security, but people who pass through the security have limited service to the northern suburbs, and we're doing the same thing on Long Island. But the important thing now is to provide as much help as quickly and as effectively to those whose lives are at risk or those who've been injured, and we're working with the city and federal officials to make sure that happens.
Do you believe that New York City is now under control?
New York City has been under attack, and until we get through this, we just have to continue to respond as strongly as we can.
And are you in a profile now? Are you in a position where you actually think there's a potential for more?
We just don't know. That's why we have to not only help those who have been injured, but also take every security step we can to try to prevent further incidents. We just don't know, Peter.
Okay. Governor Pataki, thank you very much.
Well, we'll bring you the press conference by the former US President Bill Clinton in Port Douglas as soon as it takes place. But in the meantime, we'll return you to our CNN coverage.
Hear from Lieutenant Howard Whitehead of the Los Angeles Airport Police as